We have some breaking news we wanted to share with you. United States Judge Beryl Howell has granted default judgment to election workers Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss in a defamation suit against former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani. She also granted default judgment for punitive damages and attorney's fees. This is according to released court documents. Now, these two women were the focus of a lot of attention because their names were specifically mentioned in the in the Raffensperger call as people who were doing election fraud. I think we have a clip actually of Donald Trump on that call accusing these women of personally being responsible for thousands of stolen ballots.
At least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly. 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler.
Around the week of January 6th, the FBI informed me that I needed to leave my home for safety. I can't believe this person has caused this much damage to me and my family, to have to leave my home, that I've lived there for 21 years. The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American.
So obviously you heard both Donald Trump's remarks on the call and also some of her own testimony describing when she went through. Apparently her name and the name of her daughter were brought up repeatedly, causing them to be the subject of a lot of targeted harassment. They described it as a targeted harassment campaign that ultimately forced them out of their home. What do you make of this outcome here? I know that you have some mixed feelings about defamation law, generally speaking.
Well, sure, but I mean, defamation law does exist, so people have the right to pursue legal remedy to having lies told about them if if they satisfy all the criteria of defamation, which is different state by state. It's different if you count as a public person or not. Obviously, there is and should be a high bar to this sort of thing because, in a free society, in a democracy, we need a lot of leeway to be able to criticize each other and say outrageous and indeed actually even untrue things about each other. But if it, crosses a line, if it's so malicious and reckless and done in a way where the person knows that they're not telling the truth about it, of course, I'm sure that's the defense here is Giuliani and Trump and et cetera. Again, it's a little bit like the indictment.
Well, it just wasn't true. In this instance, with the defamation case, just the fact of it not being, it's just fundamentally wasn't true. So here's a little bit more color about what
it has to go beyond that.
Giuliani was actually saying about her. This was from a write-up in The Intercept earlier this month. The latest indictment says that on December 10th, 2020, Trump lawyer and advisor Rudy Giuliani claimed at a Georgia House of Representatives committee hearing that Freeman, Moss, and an unidentified man were, quote, quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine to be used to infiltrate the crooked Dominion voting machines. So part of the concern here, the critique of him, is not just that he lied about her, stuffing ballots, but that there seemed to be a targeting of these two because of stereotypes about black women and drug use and welfare queens and the like, to gin up antagonism for them in support of Donald Trump. So
for it to be defamation, libel, et cetera, it has to be, the thing you say has to be, it has to be an act, it has to be a factual claim, not just opinion, not just describing someone, using hyperbolic terms or insulting them or something. So an actual, claiming that this person took this action with ballots or with drugs or with USB port or whatever it was, does satisfy that element of defamation because it's a factual claim rather than just if he just said she's a liar or a fraud or something, that's, again, that might not be true, but it's not defamation.
So additionally, so as a consequence of the choice to continue to focus on these two women, part of what ended up happening was that on January 4th, this Trump supporter named Trevian Kuti, he was a former publicist for Kanye West and R. Kelly, traveled from Chicago to Atlanta to try to meet Freeman. According to the indictment, Kuti had been recruited for the job by the head of Black Voices for Trump, who's also been charged. I think we've seen his mugshot circulating around. Kuti went to Freeman's house in Atlanta. When she couldn't find her, Kuti told Freeman's neighbor that she was a crisis manager trying to help. Later that day, Kuti, according to the indictment, reached Freeman by phone, said that she was in danger and that she should meet Kuti at a police station, and that she, quote, needed protection and could help her. And so there was this bizarre deception. It's unclear what she planned to do when she got her to the police station. Who knows what's going on here? But it does really seem like there was a coordinated campaign here, the arguably intimidation campaign here. It's part of the charges that are in the Georgia indictment, that there was a targeted campaign against these two women, and at least here against Rudy Giuliani on a defamation basis, they were vindicated.
I mean, none of that matters from the standpoint of, I mean, maybe it's his fault in a moral or philosophical sense. It doesn't really matter if the underlying speech is not defamatory, but if it is defamatory, then perhaps that gets factored into a judgment, damages, etc. Yeah. And it sounds like there's a compelling case that it is in fact defamatory. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see them succeeding for that. You got to be careful. So, people. We journalists, we know we have to be really careful when we make claims. That's why a lot of our writing, our comments, the things we read on the camera, our headlines get allegedly, reportedly, according to. We don't do that just for our own health, but to protect ourselves against liability risk, and it's something you have to do.
So do you think that outcomes like this, where courts are also opining on the lack of truth in the underlying claim, right? Truth is a defense. They weren't doing this. Go some way to disabusing the 70% of Republican voters who believe that Donald Trump stole the election, in part because they believed rhetoric like this about ballot boxes being stuffed by crackhead Black women in Georgia. Do you think that these kinds of outcomes, where again courts are not validating the Trump camp's view of what happened in 2020, will help to pierce the public perception among so many Republicans that the election was in fact stolen?
No. No. I mean, I think now when Republicans and Trump, even Trump, make the claim that the election is stolen, I mean, I'm recalling the Caitlin Collins town hall with Trump. He says he still believes it was stolen. He mostly talks about things that are substantively true, but I don't think would call it stolen. He's talking about, he'll say it's election interference because of the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story being suppressed and all of the censorship and all of those things. Now, I think those things those things did happen and were bad. I think that's substantively different than it was stolen because votes were misplaced or something. But I've mostly seen that substitution in rhetoric. It wouldn't surprise me if however many Republicans say the election was stolen, that's what they're talking about nowadays. But
at that town hall, I am pretty confident that he specifically brought up the briefcases full of ballots. It's not just, I think that the Hunter Biden story being suppressed cost me the election. He is specifically still doubling down on it. And I believe also in the most recent Tucker Carlson interview that he did as counter-programming to the GOP debate, he continues to push the line that he believes there was substantive election interference, actual fraud at the ballot box. And we'll have to see how that pans out. But I do think it's unfortunate that given the seriousness of that kind of a claim, I don't fault Trump supporters who would believe him. He's so specific and he's so determined and insistent with those kinds of claims. So I do wonder, as some of these court cases pan out, and increasingly there's specific, judicial undermining of his arguments in these areas, that people who have been misled by him into believing there really was election fraud, substantive, real, tangible, ballot stuffing style election fraud, are going to be frustrated with him and turn on him a little bit, because he really has actively misled the public about what was there.
I mean, it's very clear that a general election audience, moderates, swing voters, independents, people outside the hardcore very conservative constituency. You're right about those people have no appetite whatsoever for the things he says about the 2020 election, and that is a major liability for him if he is to again become a general election candidate. And but that's not that's not sinking in so far with Republican primary voters.
I'd love to see a question at the next GOP debate. Do you believe that that Trump was accurate when he said that there were ballot boxes being stuffed? Those kinds of things. So I do think that it would help at a GOP debate. Yeah.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.